I have been a sound engineer for the last 20 odd years, and in the recent 5 years I've got more into creating soundscapes for relaxing. I'm also quite dyslexic, so for me for saying things off the cusp and in the moment is quite tricky. So I think Clive has some questions that he'd like to ask me, just to put me in the zone to start with, and then I'll flow from there.
How did sound become important in your life?
I can remember looking back quite far to being a child, and my mum would leave me, single mum in London. We lived in Islington, and she would go out and do her work. She was a retoucher, also hand-coloured black and white prints, and living in the living room, watching TV with the babysitter. I remember hearing all the people's footsteps that would go down the walkway outside the flat. And from that age, I was able to accurately tell, I guess now understanding the timbre of the sound, I was able to tell when it was my mum's footsteps, the speed and the sound of her feet. Another 10 years down the line, maybe in my early 20s, when I started getting into sound, what really brought my attention to the space, other than just the beauty of music, was the harmonic value, which I understood much later. When you're mixing down sounds, you're working with things like a jigsaw puzzle, but then you have the overall part of the sound, which is the harmonic value. In lockdown, which was quite a tricky time for all of us, I decided to purchase myself a gong. Which isn't this one here. I nearly brought it with me today, but I have a gong that's 40 inches and 2 others that complement the sounds that one creates. So observing that space on the importance of sound for myself, I learnt to play the gong through lockdown, and that I felt alleviated myself from basically the misery that I was in. After being a sound engineer working in many festivals, I felt I would never go to another festival again. I may have only see 10 people again in my life. The world was closing down. So I thought the only option I kind of had was just to sit with something that was going to bring me peace. So I learned the dynamics and I learned the use of the gong through lockdown. Then it opened up, and it felt like a real pleasure to be able to share a gift that I had learned or had found throughout lockdown with other people, which was just simply relaxation. And that was it. Again, looking back at my childhood, and mum being a single parent, bringing me up in London, it was interesting that now in my adult life, I'm creating space where other adults can take time out of their busy life and just relax for an hour and a half. The sessions I run are 2 hours, predominantly an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 within the sound. And like anything, beautifully, learned behavior brings us into different states of our consciousness.
What does sound do to the brain to facilitate a space for relaxation?
So what the brain is trying to do generally with itself and its environment, including the nervous system, is it analyzes constantly and then puts things into boxes. So you're walking down the street, you hear sounds that you're familiar with, you don't think anything else. But if you hear something you're not familiar with, the brain doesn't know where to put that. And that's kind of part of the sound journey, the sound experiences, where the sounds aren't your typical tone, they're not your typical sounds you'd hear all day, generally every day. So by bringing people into a safe space and introducing sounds in their environment that are different, it allows their minds to be intrigued by new things, but not necessarily being analytical, which allows for the space for the mind to relax.
Can you explain what is entrainment and why it is important?
Yeah, so entrainment's very important, and I think the simplest perspective with entrainment is you walk into a nightclub and the music's going doom, 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 doom. Suddenly your heartbeat matches up with that tempo. Your breath will also follow. So there's an interesting rhythm going on between the breath and the heart already. Within the sense of the sound journey or other sounds that are relaxing the body, they're also connecting in with the heartbeat, which is slowing down the heartbeat, slowing down the breath, and allowing for that relaxation experience to take place.
How can we use this understanding to improve our well-being and decision-making?
So using the understanding, I think we come into a perspective of change. So rather than trying to force anything in nature, that's very not shouldn't go against the rhythms in that space. But by allowing space to facilitate change within oneself, I feel is the most important way that we can use this experience. So most things are learnt behavior. So we've got habit, and habit on this particular diagram is right in the middle. On the outside you have change, and on the inside you have an idea. This can be scaled in any way suiting the individual. Your lifestyle, your commitment to that, your plan, your feelings and your thoughts. Allowing the idea of change in is the first perspective of change. By relaxing with sound and regulating your heartbeat and breath, the rest of the system, the nervous system, starts to regulate itself at the same time. So you've got several systems in play here. There's loads of information out there about this. So I think the most important aspect is to bring in space for the self first, not putting any pressure on oneself, but allowing that space to happen builds up new habits. So then by making our decisions or choices, we come from a collected place within ourselves rather than irrational, which is just meeting what the outside is doing to us. So going from change, I'll explain a little bit else about what I've done over the years. Initially, I worked with a few animals, well, quite a few, but different species, so one being horses. 5 years later, I'm working with other animals and more horses from this yard. Bit of affection, which is always nice. So this is Tallulah. She's a local poodle. She was one of the first dogs that I'd worked with last year. And when I first met her, but she wouldn't go near anyone. She was really, really in a very high tense space. So seeing what I could do for her, we sat down. Our first session, she wouldn't stay still at all, and I sat in the other side of the room with a tuning fork, knowing that animals are a lot more sensitive, particularly dogs are a lot more sensitive to the sound than we are. I knew that some sort of effect would happen from one side. The people that were there with me said, "How will we know if anything's happening?" I just said to them, "We'll see," because I don't even know either. At the beginning, when someone starts to experience, or an animal starts to experience the sound, it's different each time. So full observation and presence is really needed to see what's going on. Initially, Tallulah sat up like this, and then she looked around her for where the sound or the vibration was coming from. We had 3 sessions. By the middle of the 3rd session, her demeanor, her perspective, her anxiety had changed completely. So now I facilitate, over the last year, I've facilitated several sessions for the dogs. And so yawning and then chilling. I think I played the bowl and the fork, which I then recorded later. And that's now available for different animals. People have used it for their pet rats that have been fighting at home. Cats that are anxious and follow the owner all the way around. People put the sound on their phone and leave the animal resting in a bed. So potentially, through this type of regulating, not only do we find space and the peace within ourselves, but we also have more emotions to share in our environment. So this is me with one of my gongs and the bowls that I use for the dogs. The bowls let off a certain rhythm, depending on the frequency. So the higher the frequency, the higher the sound, the faster the rhythm, the faster the vibration, the slower the lower the sound, the slower the vibration. So initially I meet the dogs with high tones, which engage them. And then we go for a small journey where we end up with the lower bowls, which are letting out a slow pulse. Again, entrainment comes into that. So you're meeting them on a faster, more intense space, and then bringing them down into more of a relaxed environment within themselves. I have a couple of other sounds just to demonstrate for today. This is an ocean drum that I've made myself. So again, that sort of instrument, different to a drum, will then react to the breath. So as I walk around the room using that quite fast, but then slowing it down, the entrainment that takes place as the breath will start to slow. Just leave you with one of those. Thank you for having me.